All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome out there in YouTube world. I got a special guest with me here today, Jerry Dealey from Dallas, Texas. Sure most of y'all have heard that name. There's a plaza out there after it. Jerry, how are you doing this morning?
Just fine, Chris. How are you?
I'm good, man. So tell me, how exactly did your family get that, or that name? That was that named after your family?
Yeah, it was named after my great-grand uncle. He was the publisher and basically one time the owner, majority stockholder of the Dallas Morning News. He was a city leader and he was into city planning and everything else. And when they went to build the Centennial, Texas Centennial for 1936, they condemned and tore down 2 blocks in the downtown area, and they basically dug out Dealey Plaza. So the triple underpass is truly an underpass because they pretty much dug it out and then went under the existing railroad tracks. And in 1936, it was actually named after him. As a matter of fact, he had the honor of being the first one in the official opening to drive under the tracks and go into the triple underpass. But it wasn't, the statue of him was not erected until 1949 after his death in 46. But he was my great-granduncle, so he was my great-grandfather's older brother. And he was the publisher and owner of the Dallas Morning News, a number of the people. So it was named after him for the most part.
Okay, so some deep ties there to the
Yeah, I mean, it's been around there. I've also got a little plaza in my backyard too. I call it Dealey's Plaza, but we won't talk about that.
That sounds like an enjoyable.
Infamous events have happened there as well. It's not as large as the one named.
So, where was you at the day of the assassination?
Well, actually, I was in Denver. I had moved in July of 1963. I was born in Dallas, lived here all of my early life, and then my parents got divorced in 62. And in 63, my mother remarried and moved me, my brother, and 4 stepbrothers and sisters up to Denver. So I was in 3rd grade when it happened. I was under another last name. When my mother registered me for school, she actually registered me under my stepfather's last name, even though it was never officially my name, because the stigma of divorce back in those days. So when it happened, I was in 3rd grade. We went out to lunch and came back, or 5th grade, excuse me. Came out to lunch and came back, and then were told to go home. So again, I was in Denver area. I was in 5th grade, but I was under an assumed name. But that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay, so I guess with that namesake, you had an immediate draw to the assassination. When did you first start studying it?
I was actually involved quite early. Of course, your last name being kind of drugged through the mud, and everyone talking about Dealey Plaza and stuff, and it rang a bell. So very, very early on, I started getting a hold of everything I could read or anything else on the assassination. 6 Seconds in Dallas by Tink Thompson, other books, and anything else I could get information on. Of course, my father continued to live down here, and so every summer I'd come back and visit my father here in Dallas, and we would go see the plaza occasionally. And then back in 83, 20 years later, I moved back to Dallas, and I started going down there more often and reading more and more materials on it. And eventually, early 90 or something, started doing tours just for my friends and family, first of all. And then eventually I would give professional tours on Dealey Plaza and all the Oswald sites, Oak Cliff, his rooming houses, his homes over in Fort Worth, his grave. I've been doing professional tours off and on for that for 30 years now, 40 years, something like that. Professional since the 90s. Also been involved with every kind of BBS. I first had my TRS-80 back in 1980. And I did modem dial-up and ran a bulletin board system back in modem days.
1980?
But 1980 is when I got my first TRS-80 computer.
Oh, wow.
So it's way back when. And
so you was on forums or pages way back at the beginning. I mean,
right.
Okay.
Like I said, I ran a bulletin board, an old dial-up modem bulletin board system on my TRS-80. where people could dial in, and one of the rooms in that bulletin board was about the JFK assassination. I've moderated forums, Startex, which used to be a dial-up method here in Fort Worth or Dallas-Fort Worth area, from the Fort Worth Star Telegram, any kind of online things. I moderated forums for years, JFK Lancers, November in Dallas. I moderated Deb Conway's forum for JFK Lancer for years and years and years, starting about 95, 96. I started attending the annual conferences, both November in Dallas and the COPA conference. I've spoken at them multiple times over the years. I've done all sorts of research. I help a lot of researchers, authors, all know me. I've done research for, David Lifton, Tink Thompson, all sorts of people. Where, since I'm a Dallas native, I can go down and look things up easier in the library and do a lot of the footwork for some of the researchers. I've been involved with a number of books, editing for Lancer, and just pretty much involved with the JFK assassination for years and years and years.
Did you have an opinion on Oswald's guilt or innocence from the beginning when you first started studying it? Is it evolved over time, or is it?
Well, of course, he was guilty from the beginning. I mean, it was in all the newspapers at the time. No, it pretty much it evolved over the years. I pretty much, like most people, trusted to some degree in 1964 the Warren Commission report. But then as I read more and more over the years, I saw more and more holes in it. You got to remember, the Warren Commission was a product of its times. We were right in the middle of the Cold War, and having ex-communists or, self-confessed communists, Marxist, Leninists, whatever you want to call him, that had defected to Russia was a major problem back at the time. So the Warren Commission was kind of put together to head off the Texas Court of Inquiry, Wagner Carr, and a lot of congressional investigations. And of course, people criticized the Warren Commission, but for the time, it did exactly what it was supposed to do. It was originally told, Earl Warren was told by LBJ to come along and, just kind of validate the FBI report, but the Warren Commission, and that's how he got it formed, and his intent was just to last a little while. But they decided that they would have to at least interview witnesses. They never had any investigators, but they had lawyers and other people that could do interviews and at least get a statement and put together an entire report. But it basically served its purpose. It prevented World War III and people blaming it on the communists. So it kind of, I consider it the first conspiracy, actually, other than the shooting conspiracy. It was basically a conspiracy to point to Oswald and Oswald alone, and they came up with at least a viable alternative or a viable scenario where Oswald acted completely alone. So it served its purpose, but there were lots of holes in it. Anytime they started investigating or going down a path that looked like it might point to someone else or point to Oswald's background, etc., they would pretty much try to shut that line of inquiry down. And it did its purpose. So the more I looked at it, the more I thought there's a lot of stuff missing here. So over the years, I'm still pretty well known in the research community as being on the fence or fence sitter. Now, that does not mean I believe in complete Oswald innocent and complete conspiracy and everything else, nor does it mean that I believe in a conspiracy that basically controls Oswald and makes Oswald a complete patsy. When I say conspiracy, there are lots of many smaller conspiracies out there, not a grand conspiracy as I normally do it, where the same people who controlled the investigation did a cover-up because they were the people behind the shooting of JFK. So I'm on the fence. I do believe Oswald, and we can get into the building a little bit and why I believe it. But I do.
You mentioned a patsy. How difficult? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. How difficult would that be to set that up? You mentioned a patsy. I mean, they say, "Oh, Oswald was from." Wouldn't that be hard to?
There are several ways. Yeah, there are several ways to have a patsy. A lot of people go to the extreme that Oswald was completely unknowing, unwitting, not involved patsy, where he was maybe in the second floor lunchroom in the building or something like that. And he had no clue the shooting was going on or that he was going to get blamed for it or anything else. There's also sub-level patsy of that where basically he is told to go ahead and shoot at or past the president or do something else to kind of point towards him. And then there are other shooters that he doesn't know about. There's other steps where he is willing to do the shooting and he is also involved in conspiracy. And so when you say conspiracy or patsy, you can't, it's not black or white. There are many shades of gray in there. It would be difficult for Oswald to be a completely innocent patsy because he was smart enough to know that he would be set up for something, and I'm not sure he would do that. So I constantly go back and forth between Oswald was, in my opinion, at least a participant, if not a shooter. He may have actually been the only shooter in the building, and we'll get into the building in a minute. But he may have been a participant. Now, I always vacillate between he was a participant trying to impress someone or told to do it by somebody, to the other thing is maybe Oswald wanted to do suicide by cop and he's completely alone in doing it. And I bounce back and forth.
You mentioned told to do it or impress somebody. You conspiracy, where would you think that it would be he'd be involved with?
Well, unlike
Sorry, go ahead.
Unlike the Warren Commission, I cannot simply disregard Oswald's defection, his pro and anti-Castro activities in New Orleans, his connections, his going to Mexico City, his being known by a lot of people in the anti and pro-Castro organizations, his desire to go to Cuba, supposedly in Mexico City, he wanted to go to Cuba so he could go back to Russia, his defection. He's connected to a lot of people that may have been in military intelligence, definitely the anti-Castro Cubans or pro-Castro Cubans in New Orleans. He's connected to a lot of people, and unlike the Warren Commission, I can't just simply disregard all that. There is very much a chance that he was approached by someone and asked to do things, and maybe he was trying to, maybe the old, well, I'll kill the president and then you guys will want me in there or something like that. Maybe he could be a hero of the Cuban Revolution. Unlike the Warren Commission, I just can't turn a blind eye to all of that. There's a lot of seeds of doubt in there about him acting completely and entirely alone.
You mentioned Mexico City. That's always been an interest of mine. The following day, I believe Hoover went into Johnson's office and was already discussing it with him. And Warren Johnson told Warren, convinced him to join about what Hoover told him about a little incident in Mexico City. Is that just that little incident? Do you think that could have been something that actually happened there, or the whole thing involved? I mean, I've always been curious about that statement.
Well, again, now you're saying the day after. You mean the day after the shooting, not the day after.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Mexico City. That's okay. I just want to clarify and make sure everyone knows what we're talking about here. Yeah, allegedly Hoover approached Johnson many times. Johnson was concerned, even that evening, the night of the shooting, Friday night, that he had heard through different things that Oswald went to Mexico City. He'd gotten reports in the middle of the night, phone calls and other things, even maybe not on Air Force One, but once he got back to Washington. And so he was very concerned about the connection to Cuba and Castro and possibly the Russians. So the whole thing about Mexico City, he asked Hoover about it, and in the assassination tapes, they do have recordings of him talking to Hoover about it because he recorded all of his phone calls and had the recording system in the White House that most people were not aware of at the time. Didn't come out till Watergate. But he was very concerned about the connection there. Even when he approached Earl Warren about forming the Warren Commission later that week after the assassination, he said to Warren, supposedly, you'll prevent the death of 40 million Americans if World War III breaks out. So he's very concerned about that whole breakdown. Now, the Mexico City trip, Oswald allegedly went down there and tried to go into the Russian embassy and the Cuban embassy, tried to get both to get permission to go to Cuba and go to Russia. There was a story, the Alvarez story, or Alvarado, I forget which, Alvarez story, where supposedly in one of the embassies, the Cuban embassy, I believe, someone saw someone passing a envelope of $6,500 to Oswald, and they think they were trying to pay him to do the assassinations, the way the story went. Of course, the obvious flaw of that story is if someone just saw someone passing an envelope to Oswald, how would he know there was $6,500 in it? I mean, the story just falls apart on its face when you see that. So the whole in Mexico was a concern of Johnson. So yeah, on Saturday morning, him and Hoover discussed it. But that was one of the reasons he put the Warren Commission together to look at it, is try to head off all these individual investigations popping up all over the place.
What did the Lopez report say about that when he looked at it for the House Select Committee on Assassins?
I don't know the details of that particular report. Sorry, it's not I haven't read the Lopez report recently, if I remember reading it all, so I can't go into a lot of detail on that.
All right, so back to Dallas. So Oswald moved from, you mentioned about his revolutionary connections in New Orleans. He moves to Dallas. He had any known contacts there? Any groups he was involved in?
Well, we're not aware specifically of any contacts. He did hang out with the white Russian community, George de Mohrenschildt, who was part of the Petroleum Club and had intelligence connections. Of course, back in those days, intelligence would approach anybody that traveled extensively to other countries just to find information about the other countries and get details. But he was supposedly an informant, but George de Mohrenschildt, some people believe he had CIA and definitely anti-Russian connections. But other people, we're not sure in the area about other people here in Dallas that he connected with. There are a number of rumors, like John Martino in the book Someone Would Have Talked by Larry Hancock. They talk about John Martino, who had supposedly advanced notice of the assassination. And at one point, he says he saw Oswald meet with a figure in the Sheraton Hotel. And so there's all sorts of connections and rumors, but we don't know specifically of anyone other than the white Russian community like George de Mohrenschildt that Oswald definitely connected with when he lived in Dallas.
Didn't de Mohrenschildt kill himself after he got a subpoena in the 70s to speak for that HSCA?
Yeah, House Select Committee on Assassination, and de Mohrenschildt, actually his daughter was trying to record her TV show, the audio of her TV show, and had a recorder on in the house. And allegedly, according to Gayton Fonzie, in the last investigation, de Mohrenschildt pretty much pulled out a shotgun and shot himself, is the rumor. You can hear it on the tape from what his daughter's recording is. Of course, he was alone, so we don't know if he actually killed himself or someone else did it. Lots of mysterious deaths tied around to this case.
Okay, so let's go back to that week. They printed the parade route on what, Monday or Tuesday?
Yeah, the parade route was going to be debated. It was debated. They wanted to do it at Market Hall, the Trade Mart. They also thought about doing it at the fairgrounds, which was the more secure area. So they didn't actually make the decision until that week. And then on Monday, the chief of police, Jesse Curry, and Sheriff Bill Decker rode with the Secret Service agent in charge. And they pretty much went the motorcade route, and he specified how many different police officers they would need and where they wanted them, and so on and so forth. There were about 190 police officers on the motorcade route, and there was 160 law enforcement officers at the Trade Mart. And so there were major police officers every part of the 14-mile motorcade route, or 11 to 14, I've heard both numbers, motorcade route, and they were spread all over. And the actual route was decided on a Monday and released to the newspapers the following morning or following day. So that was published in the Dallas Times Herald on the afternoon, and their map that their artist did showed the jog onto Houston Street and onto Elm Street. And the Dallas Morning News, the morning paper, also published, I think on Wednesday for the first time, the motorcade route. And their artist did not put the jog onto Houston and Elm Street. They just showed it going through Dealey Plaza and Main Street and getting on Stemmons Freeway. And that, in those two drawings, always brought up the conspiracy that the motorcade was changed to moving by the Texas School Book Depository at the last minute. But anyone driving through Dallas knows that you have to go onto Elm Street if you want to get on Stemmons Freeway. You cannot access it from Main Street because there's a median that extends on past the triple underpass, so you can't make the right-hand turn onto the highway. And the existence of those two maps and those two maps in the papers were the only two maps ever published, and they were both consistent, published, and they never changed the jog. The Dallas Times-Herald had it, the Dallas Morning News did not. But the rumor of that is, or because there were two different maps, a lot of people believe the route was changed. But the route was not changed. That was the route the entire time.
Okay, so at this point, whenever this is published, if Oswald was guilty, then that's when the wheels would start turning. If he was a patsy, then not involved at all. This is when the setup would begin. So take me through that from Wednesday to Thursday. He goes out to Dallas goes out to pick up curtain rods. Is that what happened?
Yeah, I mean, basically, he probably saw the map on Wednesday or Thursday, whatever. They were also talking about a school book depository, the different employees, about the motorcade would come by. It was kind of a topic of conversation, and they would have a chance to see it. So he goes up to Buell Frazier on Thursday afternoon. He normally had gotten a ride to and from Irving to visit his wife and kids on the weekends, living with Ruth Payne. And that day he went up on a Thursday to Buell Frazier, and he said, well, can you give me a ride to my wife's house or Ruth Payne's house tonight? And Frazier basically said, well, you realize it's not Friday, don't you? And he said, yes, he did. And he said, I'm going to go home and get some curtain rods. So he got a ride that night. Allegedly, according to Marina in the autobiography written by Priscilla Johnson McMillan, he pretty much begged her about 3 times that night to come back, live with him, because they were estranged. They're kind of separated a little bit, even though he still visited his family on the weekends, and come back, move in with him, and try to make up with her. And she said no, gave him the cold shoulder treatment three different times during the course of the evening. Next morning, he gets up while she's still in bed, and he takes off his wedding band for the first time, probably since he put it on. In Russian tradition, it's bad luck to remove your wedding band for any reason. Leaves it in a little teacup along with $160, $170, I've heard both numbers, and grabs curtain rods, or a package, which he said contained curtain rods, and walks over to Buell Frazier's house, throws the package in the back seat, waits for Frazier to come out. Frazier comes out. He sees the curtain rods or the package in the back seat. He glances at them. He doesn't pay much attention to them. He asked Lee what the package is, and Lee said, all those curtain rods I told you about. And so Frazier goes on to believe that the length of the package was about 2 feet. He says, give or take a few inches. And there's been a big debate about the length of the curtain rods over the years and the length of the package. But in all honesty, he hardly noticed it. He sees Oswald. He's sitting there revving his engine once they park by the North Warehouse, and Oswald walks away with it tucked kind of under his arm. Now, to Frazier, it looked like it was under his armpit and cupped in his hand. And of course, if it's the weapon, the Mannlicher Carcano, it breaks down to about 34 inches, which is way too long to be cupped in your hand and under the armpit. But Oswald was wearing a jacket, and Frazier was looking from behind him. So it could have been just that he saw that much of the package. The other package could have been in front of his arm or inside his coat, because it was raining that morning lightly, and inside his coat to protect it. And Frazier from behind him would never know. And according to the Warren Commission, that's how he got the rifle into the warehouse.
From the time that he left Ruth Payne till Frazier seen that, and then walking into the school depository, did anybody else see this package, or anybody else see him at the?
Frazier's sister, Lenny Mae Randall, glanced briefly out the window and saw Oswald walking by with the package. Frazier's mother was actually in town as well. And she kind of said, well, who's that? And Frazier looked down and said that was Lee. But Lenny Mae Randall also kind of saw the package, and he didn't really pay much attention to it. She just said, oh, Lee's here. And so they both kind of testified to the length of the package, but Lenny Mae Randall just glanced when Oswald went by her kitchen window and didn't see much of anything on the length of it.
Any employees at the Texas School Book Depository see him enter with the package?
Not really. Jack Doherty did say he saw Oswald when he came in that morning, but no one really paid attention to anything he was carrying. No one said that he was carrying anything. Again, if I was going to stash a weapon in a package, a plain brown wrapper, Oswald came in by the dock entrance. There's actually a little room there by the dock where they stored things and could do shipping. If I was going to bring a package with a weapon in it into the building, and again, he's walking about 50 feet ahead of Frazier, so he's got time, I would have stashed it in that little room until everyone is at work and working, and then I would sneak out, grab it, and move it wherever in the building I want. So I wouldn't necessarily walk in with a package if I got a rifle. That's just me. Again, there's no video inside the building. It's way before video and security footage and so on and so forth. But, the last time the average person was at work, can you remember exactly what someone you saw when you see him in the elevator or coming in is carrying? Most people can't.
Right. So if he's a total innocent patsy, how does somebody else get there or get the weapon?
Okay. Let's go through the scenarios a little bit. First of all, scenario one is Oswald is doing it completely alone. Of course, he has access to the building. He has the ability to move around the building. No problem. He's an employee. He's recognizable. Okay. Second scenario is he's a partial patsy, or he is encouraged to do the shooting. Again, he's the only one who has to get in and out of the building. He's the only one that has to get a rifle in, set up a sniper's nest, and get back out. And he's an employee, so he has full access to all that. The next scenario moving on up is he helps others into the building. Maybe he's got some other shooters or someone else that's going to join him, and he helps them enter the building. The problem I have with that is if he helps someone else in the building, why would he stick around afterwards? I mean, why would he help someone else access the building, get him up in a position? Maybe he built the sniper's nest earlier that morning or the day before, when no one was paying attention to what he was doing. And so they wouldn't have to build it. He'd already built it for them. He lets them shoot, and then he helps them egress the building or exit the building. And then he sticks around the lunchroom. That does not make sense to me. It seems very difficult to imagine that I'm going to set up someone, shoot from my place of employment, leave my rifle there, and then I'm not going to go away with them. I'm not going to escape with them. I would hang around the lunchroom just to establish my presence or my alibi. The last one, and the one that you asked about, is that he's a completely innocent patsy, which means he's accessing the building, he's in the building and working, and someone else is accessing the building without his knowledge. Now, again, some researchers believe that I've had researchers tell me that almost everyone who worked for the Texas School Book Company was in on it except Oswald. And that makes sense to me. But I've had researchers say that everyone is in on it, including from Jack Case and the president of the company on down, and they're all lying and so on and so forth. I've had other researchers say various individuals, Bonnie Ray Williams and the guys on the fifth floor, are in on it. They're the ones that actually did the shooting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I've never heard that one.
Yeah. I've heard just about anything for the 30 years I've been monitoring forums. Some people ask me what my most outrageous theory is, and I can go on a list forever. But the third scenario, or the final scenario, is that Oswald is in the second floor lunchroom or some other place, and someone else is accessing the building, doing the shooting, and sneaking out without his knowledge. You have three main problems with that. Number one, you've got to control Oswald. You can't have Oswald just standing next to the president of the company where he's got an alibi, or standing out front where he's filmed or photographed and has an alibi if you're setting him up as the shooter. Number two, you've got to access the building without any of the 73 employees in that building who can be anywhere at the building at any given moment, even though it's rare for the women to be in the warehouse part. You have to access that building without them seeing you. That's important because the minute they see a stranger in the building, they're going to report it. And you can't set up Oswald as the shooter if you're access the building and you're spotted by as a stranger in the building. It was not a secure building, but very seldom were strangers anywhere past the will call counter at the front. You might have a stranger in the office sections, but certainly not in the warehouse. Not that every employee knew every other employee, but again, a team of shooters coming in and out of the building is going to be very hard to explain, because then people are going to report strangers and you can't set up Oswald as the shooter. The third problem you have is you've got to make sure that you not only access and egress the building, but Oswald specifically does not see strangers. If he sees strangers in the building, then he's going to start jumping up and down as soon as possible, realizing he's being set up. Especially if he sees someone that is a shooter or a conspirator, someone he knows, a nefarious character, because he's really going to be able to see that he's being set up. And if he does that, he may rush out and start yelling to the nearest cop, "Hey, I'm being set up. I'm right here. It's not me." So those are the three problems with setting up Oswald as a patsy. You have to be able to access the building, which is very limited as far as the ability to access the building. I've done most of my presentations over the building itself, the history of the plaza, the history of the building, and walking through the building. Most of my November in Dallas and other conferences have been about stepping through the building, how to access the building and get up and down. And I've written multiple articles about, the ups and downs of the Texas School Book Depository.
How has it changed much, or from the time that I got to visit it? I mean, how would they access it to get to the 6th floor if they were trying to set him up as the as a?
Well, let's talk about that limited access to the building, because that's really important for understanding that Oswald probably acted as a shooter in the building, because the ability for strangers. There were basically one main entrance for the public, and that was at the front doors. And it pretty much went into the, two sets of double doors and went into a will call counter. And between the two sets of doors, there was a small lobby, and the lobby had stairs in it, but the stairs only went up to the 2nd floor. So that was pretty much it. You could not access any stairs from the front of the building beyond the 2nd floor if you came into that little lobby area, which was not attended. Now, there was also a small passenger elevator in that lobby, but that elevator only went up to the 4th floor. When the building was first built in 1895 or 1898, I forget which right now, it was the not Texas School Book Depository. It was South Rock Island Plow Company. And it was built in 1895. I'm going to go with that right now. And it was a 5-story building. So they built a passenger elevator in the front there in that little lobby, but it only went up to the 4th floor. That way they could put the lift mechanism on the 5th floor and not have to build a shed or roof opening for it. The building was struck by lightning in 1901, which gutted the building, and they rebuilt the building and they added the 6th and 7th floor to it. If you look at the front of the building, you can kind of see roof supports right there between 5 and 6. And that's because the building was originally only a 5-story building. So they left the passenger elevator alone. It wasn't damaged in the fire. They pretty much left it alone. And so you could only access up to the 4th floor, that front elevator. So to get to the 5th, 6th, and 7th floors, or the basement, excuse me, you had to use either the freight elevators in the back corner or the stairs in the back corner of the building. So let me cover those a little bit. There were 2 freight elevators, and they actually shared an elevator shaft. They were back to back on the elevator shaft, and they were about 7-foot tall steel cages is basically what they were. The roof of the freight elevators were perforated steel with a light fixture in it. There was no hatch for going up the top. So if you're a Bruce Willis fan of jumping around in elevator shafts, forget about it. It didn't happen. Sorry to disappoint you. But And it went up back to back, and there were two elevators. There was a manual elevator, which had a push button, and you had to hold the button or lever for the elevator to move. And there was a callable button elevator, just like any other one, had 7 buttons for all 7 floors, or 8 floors, excuse me, including the basement. And they were freight elevators, and they were back to back. They were fairly small. They were about 5 foot by 4 foot. And I'm one of the few researchers that have photos of the interior of all those elevators. I had the Gary Mack, Stephen Fagan take me some photos for a presentation years ago, and they have them at the 6th Floor Museum still. But I specifically got them photos of the interiors of those elevators and how they work. And the elevators had slatted wood gates. The manual one had a single gate system, which one gate on every floor, and then the other elevator, the automatic one, had a double gated system, which one gate on every floor, slatted wood slats, you could see right through them, and a gate on the elevator itself. For the manual elevator to work, both gates had to be down and in position. And then you could call the elevator like any other elevator, push a button, it would come down to you, provided both gates were closed. The other one, again, had single gate, had to be closed for safety before the buttons would work. You could see right through these gates. In addition to that, the elevator shaft had a row of windows on the outside of the north side of the building, so they were well lit. So when the elevators were not there, you could see straight through one set of slatted gates, wooden gates, all the way through a well-lit elevator shaft to the other floor. So again, anyone using the elevators, and I've done presentations on the whole movements, and we know the motions of the elevators by the employees based on testimony that they've given over the years. And House of Camino and Assassination also charted movements of the elevators. But you could see right through the elevator. So every time and into the elevator if you're on it. So anyone accessing the building was subject to being spotted by any of the employees on any of the floors. And so that's one weakness of other people sliding in and out of the building. But let's talk about the back stairs briefly. These were single flight stairs. They were not like a modern stairwell where you could go into the stairs and you would be hidden by walls and you've got landings and you just go up and down at will. And unless you step off or out of the stairwell, no one can see you. They were single flight stairs. They went between one floor and the next, and then you had to cross 20 or 25 feet of floor to get to the next flight of stairs. And to come back down, you reversed it. So you basically went into a 3-foot wide set of stairs. You went in on the north wall, you went up halfway, then you turned 90 degrees to your left and continued up the west walls until you came to the next floor. Then you would cross 20 or 25 feet of flooring, open floor, where you could be spotted by any of the employees at any time through the floor. Those are the ways that you access the 5th, 6th, and 7th floors, and those are the only access except for the fire escape on the outside on the Houston side of the building. So anybody accessing the building was subject to being seen by any of the employees at any time as they crossed these floors or went by them in the freight elevators. So that would be one of the things. It's not that there are not gaps of time. There are. Bonnie Ray Williams and Charles Givens and some of the other 6 guys that were overlaying the floor on the 6th floor, they were putting plywood over the floor. They raced both elevators down about 11:55 or so when they broke for lunch. And they raced them down to the bottom floor. Charles Givens will come back up after a few minutes, about 12:05, 12:03, somewhere like that. He has jacket for his cigarettes because he was going to leave the building and go visit a friend of his. He came back up in the eastern or manual elevator, and he saw Oswald while he was up there, kind of walking along the east side of the window or the east side of the warehouse from the front window area with his clipboard. And Oswald, he didn't think much of it. And Oswald said, when you get down there, please close the gate on the west elevator so I can call it when I need it, when I'm ready to get down. And so Charles Givens goes back down. A few minutes later, Bonnie Ray Williams comes up on the automatic. When Charles goes down to the first floor, the automatic elevator is gone. It's no longer there. And it's probably because Bonnie Ray Williams came up in the elevator, again, about 12:05, a little bit after 12, and sat on the 6th floor and ate his lunch. He did that because earlier in the day when they were overlaying the floors on the plywood on the floors, they had discussed that it would be a good place to watch the motorcade. And that's where he thought they were going to watch the motorcade or parade come by. So he came back about 12:05, 12:06 and sat real close to the sniper's nest, could not see into it, and sat and ate his chicken bone sandwich and his Fritos and his Dr. Pepper. And
Did he see Oswald?
he did not see Oswald. Oswald was, who knows? Oswald could have been sitting in the sniper's nest at this time. We don't know for sure, or the shooter, if you don't think it's Oswald. I don't have any problem with that. But he did not see him when the sniper's nest. Of course, there were boxes between him and the sniper's nest, and he sat behind the boxes or beside the boxes. And Oswald was, whoever was back there was very quiet. He left about 12:20, 12:25, somewhere like that, to go down and look for his friends. His friends had come up. They had been standing out. Junior Jarman and Harold Norman had been standing in front of the building, eating their lunch and talking about the motorcade and the parade coming. And they heard on police radio that the parade was on Main Street, and that was broadcast about 12:22. And so they decided, well, let's run real quick, back up, and we can watch the parade from the 5th floor. So they grabbed the east elevator, the manual, and went back up to the 5th floor and got into the windows. So when Bonnie Ray Williams came down about 12:25 in the automatic elevator, and he closed the doors behind him, he found Harold Norman and Junior Jarman, James Jarman Jr., on the 5th floor, and they were the 3 black gentlemen there at the front window during the shooting. And we don't know of any other movement of the elevators until later. Well, at one point, Jack Doherty said he went back to work at 12:30, and he took the automatic elevator up to the 5th floor. He said he went up to the 6th floor briefly to get some stock. And he was up there about 10 feet away from the elevator when he heard a shot or a loud noise in the building. So there was a window of opportunity for about 15 minutes for someone else from the outside to access the building using those elevators and or stairs. You gotta remember the elevators are just 20 feet away from the stairs or 15 feet away from the stairs. They were real close together without being seen or anyone know about it. But it's more of a logistics and planning problem. You know, we've all seen Mission Impossible, and we know almost anything's possible. But how do you plan? How do you logistically plan to get your shooters in? How do you know you're going to have that 15-minute window of opportunity to move in and out of the building? It's more of a planning and logistical problem. And so I have a real problem with anyone claiming that Loy Factor or Malcolm Wallace or anyone else was up in the 6th floor sniper's nest shooting, because they would have a real problem accessing the building.
But not only that, it sounds like you would have to know the layout, and then you've got to get them out.
Right. I mean, you got both the problems. And if Oswald is not involved or no other employees involved, you also have to allow for time to build the sniper's nest. I mean, they had moved the boxes away from the windows there on the south side, which is the front of the building. And Oswald or someone had actually moved a few boxes back towards the window to kind of create an L shape and make the sniper's nest. They had also grabbed some rolling reader boxes, which are lighter those little preschool roll up readers that you can kind of buy to teach kids to read and pictures, which are lighter boxes because they're foam filled or perforated cardboard, and had moved 3 boxes there to use as a gun rest there in the sniper's nest. So it takes time to do all that, to set all that up. Again, if it was Oswald or an employee of the building, they could have set it up the day before and no one probably would have noticed it, or even that morning. There's lots of time to set up and build a so-called sniper's nest. Again, if it's Oswald or someone else and it's Oswald's rifle, he would have to sometime, if he had stashed the rifle outside at the entrance to the dock, that little shed on the dock entrance, he would have to sometime, once people are working and not a lot of people coming in, that's when I would go back down and get my package and take it up to the sniper's nest and sit there then in the morning and reassemble the rifle or whatever you need to do by taking it out of the bag. And that is where the bag was allegedly found.
So You mentioned a while ago about Oswald and controlling him. So what's Oswald doing that day? I mean, does people see him working? You know, do they see him prior to the shooting? Or, you know, did he fill any orders?
Yes, he was filling orders. Oswald is an order filler, and he basically was filling orders. He was paid $1.25 an hour to go down to the first floor, which is a shipping floor, a very open floor, and pick up orders. He specialized in certain companies on the sixth floor, but he would know where the inventory was. He would pick up the order and on his clipboard, and he would go up and fill that order and bring it down the first floor to be shipped. It involves moving boxes, you know, getting little onesie twosies depending on the size of the order instead of boxes. What they did in that building was pretty much the spot orders, the smaller orders. They actually had a northern warehouse a few blocks up north on West Houston Street today. It wasn't there in the 60s, but up on Munger and Broadway, they had another larger warehouse called the Texas Warehouse. And that's where Frazier and Oswald parked that morning, is right outside the Texas Warehouse. And that larger warehouse would be for the larger orders, you know, beginning of school year, beginning of school semester, where you're shipping out boxes and boxes at a time. So the school book depository was pretty much, that particular building was pretty much the smaller orders and the offices. Oswald was filling orders that day. Junior Jarman at one point helping find some inventory and did talk to him that morning. But he was pretty much, you know, kind of on his own, pretty much grabbing the orders and filling them. No one's supervising him. No one's really keeping an eye on him. Everyone else is doing their own thing. The next week, actually the week after the assassination, 2 weeks after, they realized a couple of orders had not been filled. And that's when Frankie Kaiser found the clipboard that Oswald was using that day, kind of there by the sixth floor stairs. And there were 2 orders on it that had not been filled. And they didn't find that out until the week after Thanksgiving, which was the following week. So he's filling orders and apparently working, but we don't know if he actually filled any orders that day. Again, he did have 2 orders on his clipboard that he did not get.
Do you know when the last time he was actually seen before the shooting?
What was the question again, Chris? I'm sorry.
I know Carolyn Arnold's changed her story over the years, but the last confirmed sighting of Oswald, that, you know, I think I remember somebody said they seen him at 11:55, or do you know when the last time he was seen by anybody before the shooting?
Actually seen by anyone before the shooting would be about the time Charles Gibbons came back up at 12:05 to the sixth floor to get his jacket with the cigarettes in it. That's the one that actually saw Oswald. Now, you brought up Carolyn Arnold. A lot of people believe that Carolyn Arnold saw Oswald. It was in the movie JFK, so on and so forth, on the second floor lunchroom at 12:25. So let's talk about that very briefly. Carolyn Arnold made 3 alleged statements over the years. On 11/26/1963, 4 days, the Tuesday after the assassination, she went to the Dallas Police Department and wrote gave an affidavit, and a sworn affidavit, and the affidavit said basically she was standing out in front of the building and looked back and thought she caught a glimpse of Oswald on the first floor between the 2 sets of double doors. This is a sworn affidavit that she said 4 days after. She even said in the affidavit,
thought she caught a glimpse.
Sure, it was Oswald. I'm sorry?
You said her statement said she thought she caught a glimpse.
Yes, that's exactly the word she uses. She wasn't even certain it was Oswald, but she looked back and thought she saw a glimpse of him by the main entrance there on the first floor. Okay. Like all the other employees of the building, the FBI also got statements from all the other employees of the building where they asked them 5 questions: where they were, if they saw any strangers in the building, you know, who they worked for, what they did. Did they see Oswald that day? And in her statement to the FBI, which was done in March or April of 64, I don't remember the exact date of her statement, he said she did not recall seeing Oswald at all that day. Now, fast forward 15 years, 1978, November 26, 1978. Dallas Morning News reporter Earl Goltz writes an article for the Dallas Morning News that talks about the Nix film, and also allegedly interviews Carolyn Arnold. And that's when she said 15 years later that she saw Oswald in the second floor lunchroom, alone as usual, when she went to get a drink of water at about 12:25. So over the years, people really grabbed onto that. There are people out there, researchers, that really want Oswald to be innocent so they can solve a mystery. And so they go out of their way to point to, well, Oswald was seen at 12:25 in the lunchroom, according to Carolyn Arnold. I don't know that I trust Earl Galtz. He was a sensationalist journalist. I don't know, for Dallas Morning News, I don't know how reliable he is, but it's secondhand information. So she gave, hearsay from her, allegedly, but whether or not he talked her into saying that or, somehow misconstrued what she said, she was never queried other than that. She had 3 statements, 2 of which were close to the event and official sworn statements, and 1 was to a newspaper reporter 15 years later.
So
let me expand on that a little bit too.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go right ahead, yes.
A lot of people believe that the way of controlling Oswald, as I mentioned earlier, is to have him wait for a phone call. And a lot of people believe that he was on the second floor lunchroom waiting for a phone call. There are multiple problems with that. First of all, there's not a phone in the second floor lunchroom. Pay phones were expensive in 1963, and you didn't put them in some employee's workroom. Secondly, he was not allowed to use the phones in the office area close to the lunchroom, even though in the movie JFK, they say that's where he's waiting for the phone. So if you're controlling Oswald by making him wait for a phone, there was one phone number or one phone in the back of the first floor, the back of the warehouse, real close to the entrances, real close to the stairs, real close to the elevator. You can see all that, and the Domino Room, etc., that he knew the number to and would normally get calls on. So to have him call standing by any other phone, if you're trying to control him that way, would raise his suspicion. If you're trying to set him up as a patsy, you don't want to raise his suspicions at all.
Well, that actually answered the question that I was fixing to ask you. How would you control him during this time? Because you got a guy who likes politics, and you're going to have to see your president's coming by, and you're going to keep him from going out to see him. So that answered that question.
And real quick, we've already talked about accessing and egressing. Let's also talk about the Domino Room.
Okay.
The Domino Room was another lunchroom back in the back of the first floor. And pretty much called the Domino Room because the warehouse employees, pretty much that's the room they use. Again, the ladies in the office area, there was a number of ladies working the front office on the second floor and the third floor and the front of the fourth floor. And they pretty much would eat lunch in the lunchroom on the second floor where Baker and Oswald had their encounter. And that's where they would eat lunch. And most of the warehouse workers would eat lunch down in the Domino Room or play dominoes because they could be a little bit more coarse in their language and wouldn't have to offend the ladies and so on and so forth. You know how guys are, some of us. Anyway, Oswald claimed that he was in the Domino Room, according to Will Fritz, who interrogated him. And he said at one point that Junior somebody walked through, and along with the shorter black guy, which is probably Harold Norman, and walked through at one time while I was in there. A couple years ago on the 50th anniversary, I had an on-stage debate with Robert Groden after a stage play that was traveling stage play called Oswald, the Interrogation. And we set up an on-stage debate for the show after the performance was done. And in the audience was Jim Mars, another researcher. And Jim raised his hand, but the moderator with the microphone never saw him. I did. I was on the stage looking down at him. And so I asked him a few days later, when at the November in Dallas conference, when I saw him, I said, well, you raised your hand. We're going to ask a question. And he said, yeah, I was going to ask, for the benefit of the audience, how Oswald would know that Junior Jarman and Harold Norman, even though he didn't know his name, walked through the lunchroom if he wasn't actually there. And I've had researchers bring this up to me over and over again over the years. Well, how would he know that Junior Jarman and Harold Norman walked through the Domino Room unless he was there to see it? Or he's psychic, one of the two, okay? Well, my answer to Jim, and I told him the next day, I said, well, if I'd answered the question, the answer would have been there. He has been working there for 5 weeks. He knows the pattern. They called it the Domino Room because those two individuals, Junior Jarman, Harold Norman, maybe some others, used to play dominoes during lunch. Also, the window of the Domino Room is where most of the warehouse workers kept their jackets and their lunches. So again, Oswald just knew on most of the warehouse workers would go down. There was a restroom right there by the Domino Room. They'd wash up, use the restroom, so on and so forth, and then grab their lunches and clean up and either stay there and play dominoes and eat lunch or go somewhere else after they pick up their lunches. Oswald knew that. It's just common sense.
He could have threw anybody's names out. It probably would have been
He
true.
didn't have to be in the room to show that Junior Jarman walked through. I mean, Junior Jarman probably walked through that Domino Room every day of work of his life.
Okay. That I've heard that. I forgot about that. You brought it up, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense there. I mean, it could have been any of the men. He could have thrown their name out and would have went through there. Okay. So the shooting takes place, him or whoever's on the 6th floor. So what happens then? I mean, you had the girls on the stairs, and then you had Baker. What happens between the 6th floor and the 2nd?
Okay. Let's talk about that, Reese. The Girl on the Stairs is a book by Barry Ernest, a very good book, but talks about Sandra Stiles and Vicki Adams. Sandra Stiles and Vicki Adams mainly. Sandra Stiles and Vicki Adams are on the front of the 4th floor. There were actually about 20 to 22 people in the building, various floors, at the time of the shooting. And, you know, according to their testimony, and I've detailed that in some of my presentations, I won't name them all today. But Vicki Adams and Sandra Stiles are at the front of the 4th floor, watching out to the Scott's foreman's office area, which is the front part of the 4th floor, watching the motorcade. And after the shooting, they pretty much, you know, react and kind of maybe within 30 seconds decide to go down the stairs and go towards the grassy knoll, where everyone else is kind of going to see what happened, or go downstairs and outside to see what happened. So they say they took about 30 seconds to make the decision and then headed back towards the stairs. Well, they came down the stairs, you know, again, single flight of stairs, cross the floor, single flight of stairs, cross the floor, single flight of stairs, cross the floor. Vicki Adams thinks and believes that they would have been able to hear Oswald if he'd been on the stairs. They were wooden stairs. They were noisy. They had a wooden wall on the inside connected to the brick on the outside, and they were very noisy. And even though you can't see stairs below you, as a matter of fact, of the 160 feet going down the stairs from the 4th to the 2nd floor, you could probably see at most 20 feet at a time around you as you cross the open floor. That's the most you could see at any given time. So you're not going to be able to see people ahead of you on the stairs or behind you on the stairs. But they went down the stairs and they never heard or saw Oswald. Now, a lot of people believe they would have had to see him. Well, that's not true, because they're in an office area and Oswald could have gotten down the stairs ahead of them before they got back close to the stairs where they could see it behind the boxes and the walls of the office area and even see the stairs. But along with them, Dorothy Gardner also came out. And she was one of the ladies. She was actually the supervisor of Sandra and I can't think of Vicki. And she came out halfway to the wall of the office, and she stood there talking to Elsie Dorman, who did the Dorman film at the front window, and watched the girls go down the stairs. Well, they came down the stairs and they never saw Oswald, and they said they never saw Trulian Baker either. Now, Trulian Baker, Marion Baker, came into the building. We know his foot hits the lowest step out in front of the building about 22 seconds after the headshot. And he comes into the building. He encounters the janitor, Eddie Piper, somewhere in the entrance area. And he says, which way the stairs? And Eddie's so shocked to see a police officer coming at him, he actually says, I don't know. Now, he's a janitor. He knows where the stairs are. But anyway, Roy Truly, who'd been standing in front of the building, the manager of the warehouse, came in after Baker and says, okay, I'm the manager of the warehouse. Follow me. I'll take you to the stairs. They go through the little half door and actually almost stumble across the half door and have to step back and open it. And they go back between the stairs and the elevator. They see both elevators on the 5th floor. Well, this is exactly where the elevator should have been if Bonnie Ray Williams took one down to the 5th floor, or Jack Doherty, was getting stock off the 5th floor. And the other two, Harold Norman and Junior Jarman, also took the manual elevator to the 5th floor. Roy Truly said he stabbed the button a couple times. He looked up the elevator shaft, again, an open shaft, you can look up, and saw that the elevator's on the 5th floor. He hollered, release the elevator, didn't move. He said he hollered at least a second time, didn't move, and then they took the stairs. They went up the 2nd floor, or to the 2nd floor. Roy Truly went on across. Baker saw movement in the lunchroom. He saw someone walking away from him, so he opened the door and went into the lunchroom, and there he encountered Lee Harvey Oswald about 20 feet from him. And he tells Oswald, hey, you stop, come here. Oswald comes back, and Roy Truly comes down looking for Baker, because he had gone up towards the 3rd floor and realized Baker wasn't with him, and came down and find Baker and Oswald together. And there was a brief exchange, does this man belong here? Does he, whatever. And Roy Truly says, yes, he works here. And so they proceed on. Well, Vicki Adams and Sandra Stiles, when they went down the floor, also did not see Baker and Truly, and they would have had to see them because it's the same path up and down using the same stairs. They would have had to pass them at one point. The supervisor, Dorothy Garner, she basically said she saw Vicki and Sandra go down, and a few 30 seconds later, 40 seconds later, whatever it was, saw Truly and Baker come up on their way to the 5th floor. And so they had to pass each other. The only place they could have passed each other and not seen each other through that path is if they happened to go crossing the 2nd floor at the exact moment that Baker, Truly, and Oswald were in the lunchroom together. That's the only way they could have missed each other. So a lot of people insist that that means Oswald was always in the 2nd floor lunchroom, and that's the reason that Vicki Adams and Sandra Stiles did not see him. But there's another part of that too that most people just skip. If Vicki Adams and Sandra Stiles didn't see Oswald, they did not see anybody else either. So if there are other shooters in the building, they also would have the same problem exiting the building without being seen by Baker, Truly, Troy Eugene West, the shipper who was in the back of the building on the 1st floor, Sandra Stiles, Vicki Adams, Dorothy Garner, Elsie Dorman, all these other people using the stairs. In addition, there was the guys on the 5th floor who went over to the west windows immediately after the shooting and stared out. And eventually they came down the stairs. They did not see any strangers either. And to have other shooters in the building for any reason, they would have the same problems exiting and entering. Now, there is one scenario. If you have a shooter on the 6th floor that's not Oswald or not an employee, if they lingered on the 6th floor for any length of time, after Roy Truly and Baker and Sandra Stiles and Vicki Adams and everyone else stopped traveling the stairs, there is a window of about 5 minutes where they could leave. No one's close to the stairs, no one's using the stairs, and they could exit the building. I say all that, Sergeant D.V. Harkness, one of the police officers out front, said he went to the back of the building about 12:38 under orders from Inspector Sawyer to seal off the back of the building. He encounters 2 men, or a couple men, he said, that identified themselves as Secret Service. That's in addition to Joe Marshall Smith, who also saw Secret Service and showed him a badge on the grassy knoll soon after the shooting. And there were no Secret Service in Dealey Plaza officially any time except with the motorcade until they returned later that day. So again, it's a possibility that there are other conspirators in other locations, but it's very unlikely there are shooters or strangers shooting from the Texas School Book Depository. Again, this could also be that there are other shooters in addition to Oswald. Either he knows about them or he doesn't know about them. And that's another version of Patsy where you're involved, but you're not the only shooter and you are unaware of that.
You said 12:38. He encountered 2 men that were identified themselves as Secret Service agents.
Yes, D.V. Harkness said in his Warren Commission testimony, Sergeant D.V. Harkness, he went around to seal off the back of the building. The front of the building had already been sealed by police officers, And at 12:38, around 12:38, 12:40, he said he went to the back of the building, and as he went around there, he identified a couple, or saw a couple men who identified themselves as Secret Service, but they did not flash a badge or show ID.
I've never heard that before. That's pretty interesting there. You said something about multiple shooters. When I went to Dealey Plaza last year, I was like, oh, this is cool. Where's the real one at? I thought it was a replica. If you've got multiple shooter teams, that's a pretty narrow spot area to have people in. I mean, you're taking a big risk that everybody's going to get caught.
Well, yeah, again, the public's out there. If you're behind the fence, there's not many people back there. If you're talking about behind the fence. Now, the other place for multiple shooters scenario is also the Daltex Building. The Daltex Building would be a good angle kind of behind the Texas School Book Depository. The trajectories would be very similar to ballistics if it's shot from the Daltex Building. The Daltex Building is one of the buildings that's like almost a public building. It had a number of companies that lease spaces in it. And again, like any place else, you may know someone who works for a competitor or another company you're building, but you don't know them all by name. And so if they're in a common area, you might recognize them as, oh, I've seen you before, or even think they're a stranger in another building. You would only be concerned about people in your own space.
Okay.
And in mentioning the Daltex, we do know the tenants of that building, the people who are leasing space in it in 1962 and 63. One of them that's very interesting is DUO, Dallas Uranium and Oil Company. Dallas Uranium and Oil Company, and a lot of people believe, was a front company for the CIA. And they were leasing space. They pretty much had space in the 6th floor of the Daltex Building. And that's a very interesting connection if you want to think about CIA shooters or someone involved with intelligence shooting from a building. The Daltex would have been another location.
I didn't know that about the CIA written spaces there. Or maybe I had just forgot it.
Again, it wasn't the CIA. It was Dallas Uranium and Oil, which some people believe front company for the CIA, but it's not officially CIA.
So here's something for the different, you laid out the different types, levels of framing your guilt. The shooting takes place. If Oswald is somewhat involved, I mean, are they going to let him out there hailing cabs down and getting on a bus, or are they going to have somebody wait and pick him up?
Well, again, if Oswald doesn't know about other shooters, let's go with the scenario where Oswald approaches someone and says, well, I'm willing to do the job if you guys take me to Cuba where I can be hero of the revolution. I'll just meet you later. If you're setting up Oswald as a patsy, one of the worst things you can do is suddenly show up at his place of work for any reason, to pick him up, to give him, whatever, because then he might suspect he's being set up. You don't want to show up. You might want to avoid the area as far as Oswald's concerned. So if Oswald thinks he's acting alone, but he's doing it on behalf of other people, and you're setting up other shooters, maybe at the Grassy Knoll, the Daltex, or any other number of locations, you don't want Oswald to suspect he's being set up. So you don't want to come pick him up. You want to meet him someplace later, which brings up his escape and his going to the rooming house and getting his pistol. Again, some people believe he got his pistol and just wanted to go to the theater. Well, the theater is, many blocks south, but it's also about 2 blocks west of his rooming house, the main street of Beckley. And Oswald will end up several blocks east of Beckley at 10th and Patton, where he allegedly shot J.D. Tippit. So the question would come up is, why is he so far away? If he's just going to movie theater, why is he so far to the east? There's no reason for him to be 6 or 7 blocks east of Beckley, where he had the Tippit encounter, unless he was going to the library. Now, the library was 1 block further east and south of where 10th and Patton was, J.D. Tippit shooting. And so maybe he was going to the library to meet a contact. If you think about it, a library is a very safe place to meet someone or lay low for a few hours, because if you pretend you're reading a book, no one will bother you for a long time. And so maybe he was headed towards the library, and after he shot J.D. Tippit, he panicked and went the other way. Maybe the Texas Theater was a secondary meeting place, or maybe he just didn't know where he was going after he shot J.D. Tippit, and headed the other direction. And then when he saw an opportunity to duck and lay low into the Texas theater for a while, he just did that. Again, I'm always torn between he's involved in conspiracy and he's going to meet someone, or he's trying to impress somebody and try to shoot someone so he can impress a group of people. I don't know who that might be, or suicide by cop. Again, I can come back to that. I can believe that Oswald was suicide by cop. And the question comes up, well, if it's suicide by cop, why don't you come rushing out of the building with your gun, with your rifle? Well, it's hard to get in a shootout with a rifle because it's so large and bulky. So that's very difficult to get in a shootout. He did have one live round in the chamber. Maybe he escaped the school book depository and then got his pistol. And from that point on, every time he encounters a cop, he either shoots or tries to shoot him. So again, the scenario of Oswald completely alone and doing suicide by cop also kind of comes to mind. And that's the reason I'm kind of still on the fence about whether or not Oswald was, he's probably guilty. I'm about 95% certain he's guilty, but I can't prove he was a lone assassin.
That was one of the problems I've always had as far as after he left the rooming house. You know, where was he headed? He's just going to walk around down, Texas till he's picked up. Unless there was, like you said, the suicide by cop.
Yeah, I mean, Oswald knew the area. He walked everywhere he went. He had books checked out from the library. I joke when I'm on my tours that he did have a book. The book that was checked out to him was called The Shark and the Sardines. And it was about the U.S. economic influence we have on South America nations and so on and so forth. So we're the shark and they're the sardines and we're picking on. And he did have that book checked out. And I always joke that it was overdue, and Oak Cliff librarians are very, very tough. So if you're going to return your book, you're going to need your pistol.
Okay.
He knew the area. He was not lost. He had walked everywhere he went. Him and Marina had lived there off and on 4 months, sometimes in the spring of 62, in the fall of spring, winter of 63. Before they moved to New Orleans. Oswald lived there for 5 weeks after they returned from New Orleans. So he knew the area. It's not like he's lost. He's not just out wandering. Now, maybe he is wandering. Maybe he's, doesn't want to stay at the rooming house. He goes in, gets his pistol, and leaves again after putting on a jacket. But maybe he's wandering at will, or maybe he's going to meet somebody.
You just caught my attention with something. You said went in and put on a jacket. So didn't you say he had a jacket on earlier that morning too?
Yes, he did.
So he wore a jacket to work.
When he came to work that morning, he had a jacket, and he left the jacket in the window, and it was found several days later. There was a jacket. So he was working without a jacket. Of course, it's hot in the warehouse. They didn't have air conditioning it's a warehouse. They would open windows for ventilation. And he was just in his shirt and t-shirt, and he left the building, and it was fairly warm by the time, 12:30 rolled around. And so he left the building in a hurry without his jacket, did not go in the Domino Room and pick it up, and it was found a few days later. So he went home to his rooming house, and he grabbed another jacket and allegedly got his pistol. He did leave the holster in the rooming house. So Mrs. Johnson in the rooming house did not know he had a gun in there. That was one of her rules. She did not allow firearms. But they didn't search through his stuff. So he did come in. Erling Roberts, the housekeeper, saw him come in briefly. He's in there maybe 3 minutes. A police car honks their horn in front of the building. A lot of people say that's a signal to Oswald. Well, the configuration of that street and that intersection right in front of that building, I can think of a dozen reasons a police officer would honk his horn. Had nothing to do with that building whatsoever. But he puts on a jacket. Allegedly, he puts his pistol in his waistband or his pocket. We're not sure which. And he zips up, and he's last seen standing in front of the building. And then he's not seen again until 10th and Patton.
Why don't they just bring the pistol with him that morning? I mean,
because he didn't go home that morning. He went to.
No, excuse me.
He has a toddler and a baby.
That's right. I'm sorry.
So he couldn't very well. I mean, if I was going to do something as dangerous as shoot the president of the United States, I'd like to have my pistol with me. But again, he had the curtain rods in the back seat, so he couldn't turn to Frazier and say, "Oh, can you swing by my rooming house so I can get a change of clothes," or whatever excuse he can come up with. Because if he did that, Frazier would say, "Well, why don't you take your curtain rods with you?" And he didn't want to do that. So he was very quiet that morning. And he went home. He wouldn't take his pistol to his home where Ruth Payne had two little young children. He had his own toddler and his baby. So he did not take his pistol to work that day on Thursday or home. And he did not have his pistol when he shot, or he allegedly shot Kennedy.
Okay, good. Thanks for pointing that out. I wasn't even thinking. All right, so I wanted that it covered all that with Bill the other day about Tippett stuff. So he gets arrested. Take me through some of the interrogation. What happened in there? Didn't he tell Fritz he was with Shelley out front?
Yeah, well, we're not sure of all the details of it. What we have is we have about 5 pages of handwritten notes that Will Fritz wrote during the interrogation. We also have Jim Hosty, the FBI agent who was in part of the interrogation, and he wrote some notes, and he later wrote a book. And there was also a book out, an FBI agent book out, who was in part of the interrogation, and he wrote some hand notes. But they did not have Oswald, right? They did not have a recorder, and they did not have a transcriber, so we don't know exactly what was said during all of the interrogations. It's been built together. Various researchers have tried to put down different testimony of different officers that were in there, but we're not sure exactly what he said. He allegedly claimed that he was out front at one time with Bill Shelley, but none of the people on the front porch, none of the people in the school book depository, there were 12 employees down the front porch. William Shelley, Lovelady, Bill Frazier, a number of women, J.R. Molina, Otis Williams. I mean, there's about 12 of them. I mean, I don't remember all the names. Sandra Stanton. There were a number of females. No one reports Oswald being there. Eddie Piper was just inside the door as well, so Oswald did not step out and come back in because Eddie Piper said he hadn't seen Oswald for several hours by the time the shooting happened. So again, he claims to be out front, but people being interrogated for murder never lie, right? They're always completely honest.
Right. Absolutely. Now, Fritz's notes, he wrote those days after too, correct?
I'm sorry. He did what after?
Fritz's interrogation notes. He wrote those days after the after the interrogation, correct?
No, I'm talking about the 5 pages of handwritten notes.
Yeah.
He was making notes during the interrogation.
Oh, okay. All right.
He summarized that in a report days after.
Okay, that's where I had the confusion. So he was making these notes as it was going along, and then he summarized it in one.
Right. He wrote a report like most of the police officers did, but that was days after, and that's where he kind of fleshed out, all more of the details. But at the time, there are handwritten notes, and it shows his handwriting, and there are about 5 pages of it during the interrogation where he would just do brief notes of what was said.
Okay. All right. That makes sense to me now, because somebody was asking about it the other day. I said, I don't know. I need to find out about that, because I was thinking, how would he be able to remember all this and jot down just a couple of notes days later? So that clarifies that. During the time that he was in police in custody, do you know how many hours total he was interrogated?
Not that many. They kept interrupting so he could go get fingerprinted, or interrupting so he could go stand in I think 4 different lineups that he was stood in, and they would let him rest. I mean, they moved him to and from. Every time he was moving through the hall, the reporters were there and asking questions at him, and that's pretty much them moving him from the elevator from the jail through that hall. You see on all the videos and films and so on and so forth, into the homicide office where he would be put in Fritz's office. So he was moved. I think I keep thinking the number 22 comes to mind, to and from the hall, but 13 seems to be more right. But he was moved into that hall, and that's when everyone would do it. So the actual interrogation, he didn't provide a whole lot of information, according to Fritz later, and according to Curry and some of the other interrogators. But they interrogated him quite a while, but a lot of it was so people could see witnesses, and so they could get other information, etc.
A lot of this stuff, I hate to sound like an offender, but looks like his rights were violated a lot. They almost put him on paraded him around in front of everybody.
Well, again, they were not parading him around, but they did allow a lot of reporters in that hallway. It wouldn't be done today, and after that day, especially after he was shot on Sunday, it would never be done with prisoners in the future. They're wearing vests and everything else. But at that day, they pretty much wanted to allow full access to the press. Again, there was a police policy. It was called Police Order Number 81, I think, and it was printed by, or it was written by Jesse Curry, Chief of Police, where in the couple years before the assassination, a couple police officers did not allow a member of the press access to a crime scene. And Curry kind of disciplined them and wrote a memo, General Order 81, that says you must allow the press access to prisoners and make sure that they're being well treated, especially this this pro-communist, pro-Lenin Marxists in the hands of the right-wing Dallas Police Department. They did not want the press or anyone to say they're abusing Oswald. Now, as far as his rights, he was offered an attorney. It was before Miranda, and they did not have to do the Miranda rights at that time. That wasn't even a Supreme Court decision until I think 66 or so. So there was no Miranda rights read to him. He wasn't given all that option. They did offer him attorney, or the ability to contact an attorney. He was hunting out for John Apt and never reached him. John Apt was an attorney in New York that represented different communists over the years, had a reputation for it. He didn't know Oswald. But even the president of the Dallas Bar Association showed up on Saturday after that midnight press conference where Oswald said, I have no legal representation, and asked if he wanted someone from the Dallas Bar to represent him. And he said, well, maybe later. Right now, I'm still trying to reach someone else. And so his rights were never really violated per se. He was just being moved from the jail office to and from, and there happened to be a lot of press there. And there are different videos where the press is actually being told, when he comes through here, don't ask him any questions. Well, of course, the minute he came through, they asked him all sorts of questions. It was a mob scene in the press.
So let's cover the levels here again as I ask this question. So here's Oswald, completely innocent patsy, or different levels of involvement. Got the biggest secret in the world,
Or completely guilty.
Or completely guilty. Yeah, and they're going to put him on front of the world in a midnight press conference.
Well, okay,
Why would they take?
The midnight press conference was not supposed to be a press conference. It was supposed to be a showing. Actually, there was a TV station nationally, I think, that said, well, this is way, they showed a picture of Oswald and said, well, this is a former, him walking the hall. They said something about on the 10 o'clock news, well, this is the way Oswald looked when we last saw him, but in the hands of Dallas police, who knows? And the city manager, Elgin Krull, actually called the Dallas police or the mayor's office, I forget which, and said, show Oswald. We want to show the world that we're not, having in some back room beating him up or something. So show Oswald. So that was a showing at midnight or after midnight. They were supposed to show Oswald just to make sure that he wasn't being abused and that he was okay and so on and so forth. Of course, he came in, there were a bunch of microphones there, so he started saying something. And once he started saying something, they started asking questions. But it wasn't supposed to be a press conference per se.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay. So the next day, Ruby sent to silence Oswald. Why would they use somebody? Sorry. Supposedly, allegedly, let's conspiracy. Let's say
Sunday morning, we're talking. Okay.
Yeah. Why are you going to use such a high-profile figure as Ruby? Everybody knew him.
Well, Jack Ruby knew a lot of the police officers. I won't say he knew all 1,300 of them on the Dallas police force at the time, right, but he knew especially the Vice Squad. He knew a lot of the police officers in downtown. His club, the Carousel Club, he used to have, I think, Tuesday nights was police night. If you were a police officer, you got in free, or free drinks for police officers. He would do that occasionally. He was very well known by the Dallas, the underbelly of Dallas and some of the police officers. He tried to have a good relationship. He always wanted to be kind of a groupie. He wanted to be where the action was. He wanted to ingratiate himself with the other police officers. He would sometimes bring them sandwiches and stuff. So he had access to police headquarters. He could get in and out. As a matter of fact, he was approached many times by different police officers. I hear stories to this day. They were saying, what are you doing here, Jack? And at one point he turned and said, well, I'm trying to be a good host to the Jewish press. He named some kind of Hebrew Jewish press or something. He was an interpreter for, or be a good host to all the newsmen or something like that. So he had access to the police department. So if you're someone who wants to silence Oswald, let's go with that scenario for a few minutes. Jack Ruby had underworld connections. He was connected with people, the mob. As you know, a young man or a young teenager, he used to be an errand boy in Chicago when he was growing up. You know, Sparky, Jack Ruby, Jack Rubenstein. I don't know what name he was using at the time. And he had mob connections. Of course, a lot of his dancers would do at the club, mob on club. He would have dinner at Campese's and, you know, be a local mob connected guy. So if you want to silence Oswald, Jack Ruby makes sense. He had a gun, he had access, you know, and in all fairness, Dallas police, he was a familiar face, and they were surrounded by lots of unfamiliar faces. They did try at various times to check credentials and IDs, but after a while, you know, a guard, and that's what I do when I work, is I'm a security guard, non-commissioned. I don't carry a gun, but I'm a security guard. And after a while, you get to know people's faces. He was a familiar face in the Dallas Police Department, even after the first time, you know, they may have checked credentials. And at one time, he supposedly, the elevator operator of the Dallas Police Department is Frida Dillard, who does tours, his father. And he said at one time, Jack Ruby in the elevator, he said, well, you got to go down and get some press credentials, Jack. You can't be here. So he was a well-known figure in there. He also had a violent temper, and he was connected. So if you want to silence Oswald, you've got to get, again, it's a question of logistics and planning and access. You got to get someone who can access it. And Jack Ruby was that person. Maybe.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. I've never that. Okay. So what was the next part? I think you was fixing to lead into with about silencing him or not silencing him.
Well, Jack Ruby had a temper.
Mhm.
He also he pistol whipped people. He would do his own bouncing, throw people out of his club. He did have a record. He was in jail, not in jail, but he was booked a few times for like pistol whipping a client or a customer. So he had a record. He also had a temper. He was a very fiery temper, and he was very mercurial. He would change from 1 minute to the next. 1 minute be great, jovial, and the next minute mad or angry. Any number of things. He did hang around the Dallas Police Department. There are films of him in that third floor hallway. Different films. It shows Jack Ruby there. He was there off and on throughout the weekend. He did go down to Western Union that day and send, 20 or some amount of money to one of his dancers who needed it for rent. Of course, the club had been closed Friday and Saturday night, so she didn't have her usual tips and income. And he wired her some money. The time stamp on that wire is 11:17, and he shot Oswald at 11:21. So he probably walked, half block from there down to the police station, again, see what's going on, walked down the ramp, even though there was a police officer on the outside of the ramp that insisted Jack Ruby did not come down that ramp. But if that officer turned his back even briefly for traffic or anything else, Jack Ruby could have slipped down that ramp. In fact, there was a police lieutenant that came out to go run an errand and came out that entrance ramp briefly, and that police officer, and again, I forget his name right now, stepped out and stopped traffic to let that police lieutenant out. And the lieutenant himself said he did not see Jack Ruby. Then again, he was coming out and looking to his left to see the oncoming traffic, and Jack Ruby would have been walking from the Western Union office, which is on his right, so he could have slipped down right behind the car. And no one in the car who was looking at oncoming traffic would have noticed. And the officer, the sergeant outside, may have stepped out long enough and turned his back long enough to stop traffic. The Ruby walks down the ramp. He's standing there maybe 2 minutes, maybe max. And Oswald comes out, and Jack Ruby lunges forward and shoots him.
So unless they sent Ruby a text telling they're fixing to bring Oswald out, he should have already been in position if he was sent to silence him. Is that a fair statement?
It can be a fair statement. A lot of people say that, the Dallas police were in on it and they were holding him and so on and so forth. The Dallas police, the day before, the Dallas police had told the press, everyone go home, get some sleep. They've been up for more than, 30 hours, whatever, no one's sleeping, everyone's punchy, but they didn't want to miss anything. And they told the police officers, we don't want to miss anything. Well, we're going to let Oswald rest tonight. And they said, the press said, well, we don't want to miss anything, the transfer or anything else. And they were told, if you come, if you are here by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, you won't miss anything. Well, a lot of people, the researchers have said, well, that was when they were going to move him. It was at 10 o'clock. That's the reason they said that time. No, they were just telling the press, be here by 10. I promise you won't miss anything. There wasn't a set schedule when the transfer was going to take place. But yes, Jack Ruby would have barely missed him if he hadn't gone upstairs with Jim Lavelle and put on the black sweater or anything else, or if the postal inspector hadn't come over and wanted to talk and interrogate Oswald a little bit. There may have been lots of reasons that Jack Ruby would have missed him.
So, excuse me. He pulls the shooting off. Ruby's taken upstairs. They get Oswald to Parkland or the hospital, and he dies. Whatever time. I'm sorry.
1:08. He's declared dead at 1:08 p.m. Right.
No final words. No statements by Oswald.
Yeah, Jim Lavelle, who was with him in the ambulance, got in the ambulance with him, said at one point he moaned briefly and then he stiffened, and he never awoke or woke up after that, never said anything, never made a statement. They did, LBJ actually called the hospital and says, I want my man in there in case he makes a statement, or I want my man in there. So there were police officers standing by ready to listen to a last word confession or anything else. But Oswald never woke up in the hospital. They had to open his chest and do open heart massage and so on and so forth. But he never woke up after he got, after, according to Jim Lavelle, he stiffened briefly in the ambulance. And that was the last movement or motion he saw from Oswald.
I read when you said that about LBJ, I read in Crenshaw's book, even when I worked on Oswald. So he did actually make a phone call to the hospital, that LBJ?
LBJ allegedly called the hospital and said, my man's in there if we want a confession. And I don't know if he was ordering a confession or telling people to lie about a confession, but he said, we want a confession, so my man will be in there. And LBJ, it could have been Cliff Carter or one of his aides. I don't know if it was LBJ personally, but I know the White House did call and say, we want a confession, my man will be in there. And the man was masked, or one or two law enforcement in there, and fully masked, but he was not participating in, the remedial or the emergency procedures for Oswald.
So do you believe Crenshaw actually talked to him, or do we know if he talked to anybody else?
Yeah, I don't think it was Crenshaw. I don't know who for sure said it. I know someone did talk to him, but I don't know exactly how the word was passed. I just know that LBJ or the White House did call the hospital and say, we want a confession. Now, who they talked to, I don't know. Obviously, the doctors would have been very busy.
Well, that was my question, because Crenshaw, and that's my memories escaping me, Crenshaw in his book claims that he was working on Oswald, and they take him out to take a phone call from LBJ. And I'm thinking, it looks like he'd be kind of busy at the moment to take a phone call from Johnson when he's trying to save his life.
And it could have been Crenshaw that talked directly to LBJ. I don't know for certain. I just know the story that basically LBJ was insisting on a confession.
And you said 108, so they worked on him for a long time.
Yeah, 11:17 or 11:21 is when he shot. It took him probably about 20 minutes to get the ambulance there, get him on it, and it would have been, a 10-minute emergency to the hospital itself. So they were working on it for quite a while.
So when Ruby gets taken upstairs, what's his reason for shooting Oswald?
Well, he allegedly told some of the police officers, well, I knew you guys couldn't do it, so I did it for you. And so he thought he was going to be a hero, allegedly. He thought, get the dirty SOB that shot my president and so on and so forth. I don't think he analyzed, so Jackie wouldn't have to come back for trial or anything like that. I think that was after the fact, all that came up. But later on, when he was charged with murder, there's the lineup photo with him crying. That's when he first found out he was actually charged with murder, because he thought he was going to be a hero. He thought he was just going to be the man who got the dirty SOB.
So he gave that statement that I've heard shooting Jackie for a trial, or she wouldn't have to come back for a trial. Then I heard him give some kind of rambling statement about killing Jews or.
Yeah, when he had, cancer, and he had other problems. Eventually, he died of cancer in January '67, and he had problems, and he had, I think, mental problems. I don't know how much I've heard venereal diseases and other things affecting as well, but he kind of went off the deep end during his stay. And one point he was screaming in the prison about they're in the basement torturing Jews. And other time he's talked about shooting Oswald. I had to show that a Jew had guts. Different things he said over the years, if you study Ruby at all. Again, most of my expertise has been in the history of Dallas and the movements inside the school book depository and Oswald's movements and stuff. But I don't do a lot of the backstory. I mean, I've moderated forums for years, so I know a little bit about everything. But I pretty much focus on what happened in Dallas on that weekend.
You mentioned something there that I forgot to ask you about. The Texas School Book Depository. If they were this vast conspiracy where they was going to kill him, and Ruth Payne, I've heard people say she got him the job there at the School Book Depository because she was CIA connected. Tell me about that.
Well, I mean, some people. Michael Payne worked for Bell Helicopter, and he did have security clearance. And there are rumors and speculation that Ruth Payne was connected to CIA and maybe set Oswald up, along with George de Mohrenschildt setting up Oswald, all sorts of little stories like that. Ruth Payne did call Roy Truly, the manager of the warehouse, at the suggestion of Lenny Mae Randall, which was Buell Frazier's sister. And they said, well, where Buell works temporarily as an order filler for books, they're looking for people. And so she did call and ask and told Oswald about it, and Oswald went down and interviewed and got the job. I don't know if that means she got him the job. And again, it's putting Oswald 5 weeks ahead of time. I think October 15th is when he started working there. 5 weeks ahead of time on the motorcade route. They also found a map where Oswald was searching, and there was a number of businesses along Main Street that he had applied with. Well, those are hotels and things like that will hire bellmen or porters or housekeepers. If he's just looking for general employment, it's not surprising that there are circled maps there. But if you believe that, he's involved in the conspiracy and CIA is setting all this up, and, any kind of deep end you want to jump off of, I don't have a problem with that. But my biggest problem I have with all the research and all the conspiracy theorists is if you're going to come up with a theory such as Oswald's in the lunchroom and someone else is accessing the building, you've got to be able to logically talk about how the planning happened and how the movements happened. And, I recently put together a graph to talk about the timing of all the stairs and stuff after the shooting and how those four parties, Sandra Miles and Vicki Adams and Baker and Truly and the shooter, or Oswald, if you prefer that name, or other individuals in the building, use the stairs and how they could pass each other and everything else. I put together a whole scenario about that in some of my published work, and a whole chart of the timing and how long it would take and how they could all pass each other, show how it makes sense. But people say, well, it's all speculation. As a matter of fact, as one person put it, it's horrendous speculation. Okay, well, let's hear your speculation. I've been asking for years, if you got a scenario where he's in the lunchroom and you got people in and out of the building, figure it out. Let me know. Give me a scenario saying how they access the building, because that's what I keep coming back to. Everything has to be logistic.
So yours was laid out how it was possible all of them missed each other, not how somebody could get in and get out. Correct?
Right. It was okay. How they missed each other in those first crucial 3 or 4 minutes around the shooting itself.
Because the way you explain it, you've got just seconds worth of time there that you're going to get caught.
Yeah, I mean, there's a period of time there. Now, again, after that first 3 minutes, there's about 5 to 6 minutes where we don't know of anyone using those stairs or elevators. Now, again, the police started coming into the building about 12:38. But, after that first 3 minutes, that gives you 5 minutes where there's no real police presence in the building except Marion Baker, and he's on the roof by this time. And there's no police officer in the building, and no one that we know of is using those back stairs. So there's 5 minutes window of opportunity that someone could go in or exit that building without being seen. But the problem is how do you plan for that? If you're a planner, again, we've all seen Mission Impossible. We know we can do anything. Of course, that's Hollywood. But real life, how do you plan to get your people in the building and back out? And I've never seen anyone come up with a scenario of how that would be done. And it needs to be done. Any conspiracy needs to be planned out. It's got to happen. Put back into my fence.
That was. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, because you said 5 minutes after from the time that Baker got in there and had the encounter with Oswald, there was a 5 minute time.
5 minutes after he gets up to the elevator. Let me go back through Baker's path a little bit because it's kind of important. He again, his foot hits the bottom steps in the Couch Darnell film. You can see his foot hitting the bottom steps about 22 seconds after the headshot.
22 seconds.
22 seconds after. They did a recreation of how quickly can you go for 100 feet, park your motorcycle, and get to the second floor lunchroom. The first recreation he did it was 1 minute and 30 seconds. His second recreation he did in 1:15. He ran a little bit faster. But he didn't stop and start like he did that day. He did not wait at the elevator. He did not, run into Eddie Piper and everything else. So he probably made it into the lunchroom about 2 minutes after the shooting. After the Oswald encounter, him and Roy Truly continue up the stairs. They cross the 3rd floor. They cross the 4th floor. When they come out of the stairs on the 5th floor, Roy Truly sees that the elevator closer to him, the automatic one, is gone now. And it's probably because Jack Doherty took it back down to the 1st floor after he heard a noise. And so they got into the elevator over on the far side, the manual elevator on the far side of the 5th floor, the other side of the missing elevator. They got in the elevator and they bypassed the 6th floor and went straight to the 7th floor. There they took the stairs up to the roof and they spent about 8 minutes up on the roof. So after all that movement, Oswald down from the stairs, or the shooter down from the stair, or Oswald down from the stairs, Sandra Stiles and Vicki Adams down from the stairs, Baker and Truly up the stairs, bypassing the 6th floor. If the shooters, whoever the strangers may be, happen to just linger in the 6th floor that long, then for the next 5 minutes, no one is using the elevator or the stairs that we know of. So there is an opportunity for them to exit the building. And again, if they did exit the building, you got to remember, Sergeant D.V. Harkness said there were a couple people as he got back to the back of the building by the dock who identified them as the Secret Service. Maybe those are the shooters leaving.
Okay, how are the shooters going to know that the 6th floor would be empty that day?
That's, again, part of the planning process. If they're not employees, it's very difficult to know exactly where all 73 employees are going to be in the building. And again, 22 of them stayed in the building, 20 to 22 of them stayed in the building. It's just hard to guess from the outside how you're going to plan to get your people in position. And if the sniper's nest is already built, you've got to allow for time to build a sniper's nest and then do the shooting and get your people out of position. The logistics and planning is what I keep coming back to on all this. And that's the reason it indicates to me with the probability of about 95% that Oswald was a shooter inside the school book depository. Now, I didn't say lone shooter. I said he was a shooter inside the school book depository, probably without help. Now, does that mean he's the lone shooter and the only person involved? I don't know. Even if he is the lone shooter, that does not eliminate that he's doing it on the behalf of someone or trying to impress someone, and there's a conspiracy. Don't know that.
Yeah, Booth was a long gunman too.
Mm-hmm. So we've gone all the way around and back to the beginning.
Yeah, I think because I kind of got off track there earlier when I got was talking about when he left there. I forgot. I had a question about that, but I got way off track. So yeah, we got around there and came back to the beginning. I mean, I guess that's the thing that I love how you present about that is the logistics, because it almost seems impossible. But then there's this time frame that yeah, it could, but it seems like everything would have to line up perfect for them.
Come on, Chris, you've seen Mission Impossible. You know we can do the impossible.
Well, I mean, what did they use? They rappel out the back of the building, and like Jack Ruby was waiting for them back there. I heard some woman say that on an interview.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, if I'm going to repel out of that building, I've had researchers say they're repelling down the elevator shaft. Well, the elevator shaft has 2 cages in it that go from side to side. There's no way you're going to repel past them, you know. And how obvious would that be if some employees walking by the elevators, oh look, there's someone repelling down the elevator shaft. It's like, yeah, okay, let's be realistic. Yeah, anything that you're going to do, anything that happened had to be planned. And if you go beyond Oswald as the shooter in the building, anything else just no, the logistics are not there. The planning is not there. Again, people tell me CIA could come and watch me sleep in the middle of my night in my bedroom in the middle of the night, and I would never know where they were there. I hope they are. I hope someone else is as bored with my life as I am. You know, I hope there's some 8 FBI agents that are monitoring me 24 hours a day, because I don't want to be the only person bored with this life. I'd rather bore them as well. Misery loves company.
So, in how many ever years of studying it, still can't decide conspiracy or no?
I cannot decide conspiracy or no. I am 95% convinced that Oswald was a shooter. Mm-hmm. As such, he would have been tried for murder and found guilty. You got to remember, the problem they have with all these scenarios and reenactments and trials and test cases and everything else is they seem to want to prove that Oswald was a lone shooter versus just whether or not he was involved. You don't have to be alone to be guilty of murder in Texas. As a matter of fact, in Texas law, even the getaway driver, if you're committing a crime like robbing a bank and you're just sitting in the getaway car, like Clyde Barrow was the first shooting of Butcher. There was a first shooting that someone else actually did the shooting, but he was in the getaway car waiting for them to come back out from the robbery in a grocery store. You're equally guilty under Texas law, even if you're the getaway driver. You don't have to actually pull the trigger, but if you're committing a felony and someone gets shot or murdered, you're guilty of murder. Yeah. So Oswald is 95% guilty of murder, and he would have been tried, and he definitely would have been found guilty of Tippit. He would have been a little bit more questionable on the JFK because, again, no one can physically put him in that window shooting that gun. But then again, I can't put him anywhere else either.
So, we talked about this just earlier when I mentioned Mexico City. If
lost it.
Sorry, a phone call came in. Where would you lean to who would be involved in it?
I'm sorry. One more time on the question.
Oh, sorry. The phone call came in and cut us off. So, if there was a conspiracy, who would you lean towards that he was involved with?
The anti-Castro. If I was going to lay it on somebody, I would put it on the anti-Castro Cubans and or the mafia and or the CIA agents or military intelligence that wanted to invade Cuba. The scenario that I come up with most often is, let's get someone to shoot the President of the United States in public. Again, if you just want to kill the President of the United States, like, you know, some people say LBJ did it. Well, there's got to be easier ways to eliminate the President of the United States. You know, have a jealous boyfriend for one of the women he's hanging around shooting, you know, whatever. There's easier ways to do it than in public, in your home state, in a motorcade, so on and so forth. So if I was going to lay the blame on anyone, I would select someone that wanted us to publicly kill Kennedy and either have that shooter escape, tie it to Oswald, a pro-Castro, pro-Cuba, pro-communist patsy, whether he actually actively is involved or not, lay the blame at his doorstep, at Castro's doorstep, and use as an excuse to invade Cuba. Now, to do that, you've got to lay the blame at Oswald and either eliminate him or get him out of the country. John Martino, another one of the people who's, according to Larry Hancock, somebody would have talked, I forget the title, basically says John Martino admitted he was a money man for the anti-Castro Cubans, and he was at home that day and told his son while he was painting the kitchen, watch the news, if anything happens, let me know. And sure enough, once it happened, he stopped painting the kitchen and made a series of phone calls. He said that Oswald was a patsy, not one of the hitmen, and they were supposed to take him out of the country and they would shoot him and kill him, but he thought he was going to Cuba to be a hero. And that's what I come up with the most often when I do it is let's shoot Kennedy in public. Let's blame it on a lone nut, or let's blame it on Castro or Cuba or whatever, and use that as an excuse to invade Cuba. Now, having said all that, you don't want to blame Oswald as a lone nut. You got to remember, only the government needed a lone nut. They wanted to point Oswald and Oswald alone so they could stop investigating. But if the scenario I just said of let's set up and blame Castro, you want there to be a conspiracy. You want Oswald to be the obvious point and patsy and blame guy, but you want people to believe there's a conspiracy that Castro is behind so that you have an excuse to invade Cuba and finally get that done.
Now, what kind of connections would Oswald have to the mob for them to pick him out as the patsy?
Well, his uncle in New Orleans, I think his name was Murray, something like that, actually was working with the mob, Carlos Marcelo, New Orleans. So he did have connections to the mafia, but the anti-Castro Cubans that Oswald was hanging around, he did his fair play for Cuba and everything else. The CIA, military intelligence, mafia, they're all tied together against Castro in there some way. So there are links throughout of a lot of people who wanted the United States to get rid of Castro, from the mafia, the CIA, military intelligence on down.
Have you ever heard of the book Patrick Collins was telling me about it, Castro Secrets? Or Castro?
I have not. I've heard of it, but I've not read that book.
I haven't either. He was telling me about it the other day, and I found that very interesting that he would have knowledge of the events before they took place, and just how that would know that.
Again, there were a lot of people that claimed to have knowledge before it took place. Joseph Milter, William Somerset, who was recorded by an FBI. William Somerset was an informant for the FBI, recorded by the FBI saying it will happen from a high-powered rifle in a building and that someone will be blamed. He knew about it. Rose Cherami supposedly was dumped out on a road in Louisiana by guys that were on their way to Dallas to kill Kennedy, and she was on drugs and was sitting there making noises like it. Richard Case Nagel and Dick Russell's The Man Who Knew Too Much. I read that one. Walks into a bank in El Paso in September, asks for a money order, and when the teller steps away, fires 2 shots in the ceiling, and then goes out in his car and waits for the police to arrest him. He says that they were planning to shoot Kennedy, and he didn't want to be blamed for the patsy. He also said that he knew Oswald, and he knew Oswald was approached by people who claimed they represent Cuba and Castro, but in reality, they were anti-Castro Cubans or CIA, and he was being set up. There were a lot. John Martino, the other guy painting his kitchen, also had advanced knowledge. There were other people with advanced knowledge. I mean, the mafia figures, Giancana, Marcello, so on and so forth. All sorts of John Roselli, other people that claimed to know ahead of time that there was going to be hit. There were definite conspiracies to get rid of Kennedy from multiple sources, but whether or not Oswald was involved in any of those conspiracies or any of those conspiracies resulted in the death of Kennedy, I still can't tell you. I know they exist.
Very interesting. So there was you believe there was conspiracies existed to kill Kennedy, but Oswald might not have been involved
Probably
with
by
any of
killing
it.
him, yes.
Huh.
But whether or not he was killed as a result of all those, I still can't tell you to this day.
Okay, that's a pretty unique take on it. So there was conspiracies to kill him, but whether Oswald was involved, you don't know.
Or even if Oswald himself was just a complete innocent patsy, whether one of those conspiracies succeeded in killing him, I can't tell you. And that's the reason I'm still on the fence in the middle, and I've been known to be on the fence for years. And everyone and their brother have been trying to get me to commit one way or the other. And I'm sorry, I'm just stuck in the middle.
All right. So tell me, what is one thing that would make you believe, or in your mind, one thing believe in a conspiracy, and one thing that tells you there isn't one?
Well, again, I just said there are multiple conspiracies.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry, that he was actually,
that he was involved with it.
Mm-hmm.
At this date, there's no smoking gun left. There's no way that you can point, because even when someone comes forward and says, well, I did it, like James Files did a few years ago, he said he was a grassy knoll shooter. We're going to find ways to disbelieve him or believe him, depending on what you want to do. So there is no smoking gun left. There's no hard evidence by any means. Again, some of the researchers will say, well, that's because the government controlled the evidence, so we only saw the hard evidence that they wanted us to see. And you can point to, a cover-up conspiracy. I don't like the word cover-up, but a non-investigation conspiracy and I said the Warren Commission was a non-investigation conspiracy, and because anytime they started pointing anywhere that looked like it pointed to Russia, Cuba, beyond Oswald, they would try to change the subject. So again, to me, it's instead of a grand conspiracy of the same people who set Oswald up, killed Kennedy, and also covered it up, there's a lot of little conspiracies, and I consider the non-investigation from the Katzenbach memo done that Sunday that says we must convince the public that Oswald acted completely alone, no one else is at large, to the Warren Commission, and even beyond that, there was another conspiracy to not investigate fully.
What do you think McCall meant by a benign cover-up?
A benign cover-up is basically a cover-up to not investigate because we don't want to point the finger at Russia or Cuba and start World War III. You got to remember, this is the height of the Cold War.
Right.
Year before that, with the Cuban Missile Crisis, we were on the verge of a nuclear war. So they wanted to avoid anything. So it's benign. It protects the American people from World War III. And so you go out of your way to say, well, we're going to come up with a scenario, which is what the Warren Commission did, that says Oswald acted completely alone and there's no one else out there at large and he was not influenced by anybody. And that's what the Warren Commission did. That's kind of what their charter was. That's what they were supposed to do.
Okay.
Whether or not it's accurate, we'll probably never know.
As far as the people, and I guess I go back to first generation researchers, then somebody coming up with books 50 years later. But any of those guys you'd recommend to people, Weisberg, Mark Lane, as far as attacking the Warren Commission report?
Pretty much all of them. When I give my tours, I give people a reading list, a suggested reading list. Again, the Warren Commission report, whether you believe it or not, you have to read it. And very few people that have actually read it cover to cover. There are a few, but most people have not read it cover to cover. But other than that, some of the early researchers, you got to remember, the early researchers did it in the days of snail mail and feet on the ground. There was no internet. There was, very little phone call investigation you could do. You certainly couldn't look at the evidence in the internet. You had to get on the ground and go get permission and look at evidence. So I respect all the pioneers, the the Mark Lanes, some of the stuff, he came up with a lot of stuff. He was one of the few people that were actually representing Oswald's interests, but he had a tendency to sensationalize some stuff. And some people say he really, made stuff up and twisted words and everything else. But all the early researchers, Josiah Tink Thompson, 6 Seconds in Dallas. I mean, all the early, Weisberg, very good, House Select Committee assassinations. He was a very good researcher. All the early researchers pretty much criticized the Warren report, and very few of them came up with an actual scenario of their own, but they just looked at the weaknesses of the Warren report and the evidence against Oswald and the weaknesses of that evidence. If you're talking about large volumes of books, Bloody Treason by Noel Twyman is a very good book in the fact that it's huge. Reclaiming History, Bugliosi. I knew Vince. Whenever Vince came to Dallas, he would get Ken Holmes, which was associated with mine, to give him tours. And so I knew Vince outside of, just his public book and stuff. His book is very intensive and is very comprehensive. He's a lone nut kind of guy, but he himself will mention the 43 different problems with the evidence, and he admits to problems with the evidence. So his book is very good. As long as you take any book you read, take it with a grain of salt, because
43 pieces of evidence
to give their opinion. Now, some of them are very sensational. They come up with really weird CIA links. I mentioned a couple of those books. Pictures of Pain by Trask is an excellent book if you just want to talk about the photographic evidence and know about the background history of that. The Girl Down the Stairs by Barry Ernest. It's a good book about his search for Vicki Adams and a little bit of what she said in interviews, but doesn't go into a lot of detail about the assassination itself. But it's still a book. I know Barry, and it's a book I would recommend because I specialize more in the movements in the building, and it's a good book as far as it goes, as that goes. All sorts of books like that I could recommend. Some of them, Someone Would Have Talked by Larry Hancock. Larry does a little bit different. He goes on the outside and he looks for connections like John Martino and other people out in the world, anti-Castro Cubans for a lot of them, mafia, and he tries to come backwards to see if they had links to Oswald. And so he looks for a lot of the CIA and intelligence and mafia connections on the outside to see if they have links back into Dallas and could have had links to Oswald. And that's a little bit different approach because most people look at the Oswald, the things that happened, and then go outwards to say, well, maybe this happened, maybe that happened.
Okay, I was trying to think. Oh yeah, there's one other lady I wanted to ask you about. That was from there. Mary Farrell. Everybody says she's a CT. Is she? Because I can't pick that up on our website. She has a lot of information, but I've not.
Mary Farrell. Yeah, I knew Mary. Mary actually, the senior home that she moved into, she was the next apartment down from my stepfather and my mother.
Oh wow!
And so I knew Mary fairly well. I never went to her house where she had all her evidence. And this is after she moved out of her house when she lived in assisted living, and it was towards the end of her life. But I also met her at a lot of the conferences. Mary Farrell was one of the best evidence trackers you've ever seen in your life. I've heard stories where you could go over to Mary's house and you talk about a subject, and she goes, "Oh, I have this paper," and it was some weird memo or letter, and she would know exactly where it was. She had a mind like a steel trap. What Mary Farrell did is early days, she never wrote a book, but in the early days, researchers had to do it by talking to each other and not just sitting somewhere and looking on the internet and seeing evidence and so on and so forth. They had to track things down and
Hey Jerry.
got a call.
Oh okay.
So Mary was a very good resource for all those investigators back in the days where you had to track down a piece of paper or a report, because she had file cabinet after file cabinet, a garage full of resource materials.
Yeah, for anybody out there, her website is just absolutely amazing. When you said that about a document, I mean, I'll go on there. Yeah, she'll have, I mean, like I said, any subject, any person, and it'll just be paper after paper after paper. And I can't believe that website's, I mean, how she collected that much stuff, it just amazes me. I met her, sounds phenomenal.
Well, Chris, I'm getting kind of tired talking.
Yeah, I was fixing to say, if there's anything else you wanted to add, I've kept you on here long enough.
And I think if you got lots of material, we can always do this some other day if there's some subject you want to talk about. But
yeah,
for now,
sounds great. I'm sorry for keeping you for so long, but I just got caught up in it. And
I know that happens. That's one of the subjects that when you get interested in it, you just keep going.
Well, thanks a lot, Jerry, and maybe I'll get to Dallas and see you again someday. And but don't put ketchup on a steak.
Okay. Make sure you give me a link so I can see what you put together.
I will, man. I sure will. I'll link it and post all of it, and I'll holler at you soon.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Thanks, man. Call.